So it's been about a month and a half since the 76ers acquired Jimmy Butler. I believe they are 14-5 in the games he has played. There's been some blowouts, there's been some close games. Of course, Jimmy has had a couple of buzzer beaters. And I think the eye test versus the stats would suggest some interesting things about this team. And the first thing I want to look at is the five-man lineup of Wilson Chandler, J.J. Redick, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, and Jimmy Butler. That lineup has been excellent for them. It's about a plus 17, plus 18. Props to Wilson Chandler for bouncing back as an NBA player. I mean, I think there are some who would have thought that he just wasn't that good the past couple of years for Denver. I mean, sure, he could make threes, but that was kind of all he was doing, and granted, that is a lot of what he's doing now, but I think he's been making plays off the dribble occasionally. The fact that he's grabbing about as many rebounds as he did for the Nuggets the past 2 years, while also playing about 6 less minutes a game, is interesting. Some of this, of course, is because he's technically a power forward. I think this team is pretty positionless, but he is closer to the basket a lot on defense, and he's been good. And of course, Redick is huge for them with his shooting and his handoff plays with Embiid and all that. But of course, you got to talk about Jimmy, Ben, and Embiid. I think what's so interesting since they got Jimmy is Ben Simmons is actually 4th on this team in usage rate. And, some of that I guess you could have seen coming because Jimmy's got to get the ball and he's got to do his ISOs and his pick and rolls and his occasional post-ups. I don't think Jimmy has had the ball as much as he did with the T-Wolves, which is something we also could have expected because there's going to be the Embiid post-ups and there's going to be the Ben Simmons whatever because the Sixers don't run a lot of set plays with Simmons. Or I should say they don't run a lot of high screens. They'll run like those free throw line screens for Ben, which are pretty successful, but still, Jimmy has the ball a little bit more than Ben does right now, and I mean, to be fair, Ben Simmons' counting stats have still been damn good, and he's still been able to be himself, but I wonder how that's going to play out as the year goes along. Is Ben Simmons going to attempt to get back to being the number 2 dude on this team in usage? Is Jimmy going to do what he did with the T-Wolves, which is he shows up and he's content with being kind of in the background, but then eventually he's the guy who's doing most of the stuff? That'll be very interesting. I think which either one happens, it'll probably be fine because like I said in my video when they got Jimmy, these two are both really good passers. They're really good at breaking down defenders. Both can play in transition. And I think Jimmy has been a damn good off-ball player for them. His three-point shot has been excellent at over 40%. Granted, shooting about 3.5 a game, but hey, still, that's progress. That's about in line with where he's been for most of his career. And I think as a result of this, it has allowed Philly to be, I believe, the 4th best offense since they got Jimmy. Now, there are some other things we can look at. Number 1 is Embiid. He, of course, expressed his displeasure with being out on the perimeter a little bit more often. And just from watching the games, it does seem like that is the case occasionally. He's actually shooting less jump shots since Jimmy Butler was acquired, which may not really mean anything. It's the difference is so small, it really might be not even worth talking about. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be a challenge for Brett Brown to just draw up some creative stuff. And I could picture this not being a big problem in the regular season, but more so in the playoffs when they're facing smart teams, how they're going to dare certain dudes to shoot on this team and they're going to go under screens and all that stuff. And they're going to stop Ben Simmons in transition. Because if you look at, Indiana, they're the best defense in the league for a little while now. The Celtics have a lot of big defenders. The Raptors do. The Bucks do as well. So, yeah, the idea of, who has to space the floor and does that have to be Embiid in order to give Ben Simmons the proper runway? And then as a result, is Embiid not as effective? I think that's going to come out more in a 7-game series, more so than, a Saturday night against insert random NBA team. So that will be interesting. I think my gut feeling is there's going to be a little bit of that where Embiid is out on the perimeter, perhaps a little too much. I can picture if you look at the NBA standings right now, where Philadelphia is sitting in round 2, or actually we can say round 1, they would be facing the Celtics. I could definitely picture the Celtics winning game 1 in Philly, and Joel Embiid had to take like 6 threes. And then there's going to be all that talk about, well, they got to do something different, and then Brett Brown will be on the Twitter hot seat and all that. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. Next, we got to talk about their defense, which has actually been mid-tier since they acquired Jimmy. I think some of this is, one, Jimmy hasn't played in all the games, so we should not freak out as much because the stats are not going to account for that. But I think what we can look at is Covington's just a better defender than Jimmy. I thought Jimmy was a better defender, or at least a better on-ball one. I was just wrong. Now, maybe some of that is because Covington can devote more of his energy to defense, but even so, it's safe to say he's a better defender than Jimmy. So a little bit of a downgrade, on top of the fact that when you go down the list of NBA teams who have big guys who space out the floor now, whether it's mid-range or 3, it's nearly like half the league at this point. And a lot of them are in the East, between Brook Lopez, Al Horford, Serge Ibaka, because he's playing center now, of course, for the Raptors. He's not really making his threes, but he still forces you to step out a little bit. On top of the times when Embiid may get switched on to like a power forward like Blake Griffin, who's shooting a lot nowadays. I think teams are just finding more ways to stretch out Embiid to at least pass the free throw line. And when you combine that with JJ Redick, who, sure, he may play hard and he may understand the scheme, but he's going to get beat on defense, on top of Amir Johnson just isn't that good at this point, and the fact that Covington is a little better than Jimmy, I guess you put all that together and you get to be the 15th best defensive team in the league. I think getting a backup big who can really defend would be huge for them. Also acquiring a two-way wing who can defend a little bit more. They have found some shooting with Muscala and Shamet, and Korkmaz, he's okay, I guess. But let's say if you could replace Landry Shamet with Courtney Lee, if Lee is still Courtney Lee, that could end up being better for you than Shamet, even if his shooting has been pretty legit. And I'm not saying they have to get Courtney Lee in particular, because I know his contract isn't exactly cheap, but somebody like that could help them out. If I can go back to the defense of the starting lineup a little bit, which, again, the starting 5 has had an awesome net rating, but I think we saw against the Raptors that one game with Embiid, he is still liable to just have an underwhelming defensive performance, especially against a good team who has a big that he has to step out on like Ibaka, because it's the combination of that and the way that Embiid scores, which a lot of the time is in the post, and he gets fouled a lot, and he's trading elbows on the boards and all that. It's definitely tiring. Of course, Embiid also didn't play for 2 years and has not been playing basketball all his life the way the typical 24-year-old NBA player has, so there are times when he could just get tired. I think one way you can deal with that is to do what they did in the round 2 series against the Celtics, where they had him defend Marcus Morris. So let's say we'll take that Raptors game again, right? Brett Brown could have recognized that Embiid was a little bit more tired, having to do everything, and he could have put him on OG, if OG was even playing, and you could just dare Anunoby to shoot some corner threes, and you could give Embiid just a couple minutes of a rest, and then you pull him from the game in your natural rotation, and then by the time the fourth quarter has begun, you hope that he has just gained enough stamina back to where you can put him on Ibaka for the last 5 minutes or whatever, and hope that your defense can be elite. So, things like that. We do have to remember, Embiid has the highest usage on this team by far, and he is the last line of defense. That is a tough thing to do night after night and then into the playoffs. So, giving him a little bit of a break every now and then, I would definitely be down for that. One other thing I want to see with Embiid is what are his minutes going to be down the stretch, because I know that he has overcome a lot of the lower body troubles and he's dealt with all of the minutes restrictions they want to give him, and not playing back-to-backs and all that stuff for the last 2 years. But I don't think you should just be throwing him to the wolves in the regular season, and there have been stretches this season where he's played 35 to 40 minutes kind of consistently. I mean, there was a stretch in November where he played like 5 or 6 straight games of at least 35 minutes. Like, you might be playing with fire on that one. I'm just saying, you might want to scale it back a little. And to be fair to Brett Brown, there's been a stretch in December where Embiid played less than 30 minutes for like 4 games in a row. So perhaps he is aware of that. Perhaps it was just because all those games were blowouts, but I don't think you should just be going nuts with his minutes. But anyway, to put all this back together, I think Jimmy Butler has definitely raised this team's ceiling, perhaps has lowered their floor, but it doesn't seem like any of the problems that you believed that this team was going to have with offense are happening. And then as far as defense is concerned, getting a two-way wing, getting a backup 5 who can really play some defense, on top of helping Embiid out here and there, could be the key to success for this Philly team. And also, I have no idea what's going to happen with Markelle Fultz. So there's your ending.